I'm back again, and now it's time to populate those major locations we had began writing in the previous video. And populating these locations means putting shops, factions, and major NPCs into an area. And like before, this whole process is a slow step-by-step where we just lay the base foundation of an area prior to when the party actually arrives. Which means once again we will be doing only the groundwork, so when it's time to use the location we will be able to properly shape the world around the party and what they're doing. Which is the whole point of writing a Dungeons & Dragons world in the first place. Today we are going to be discussing writing factions for your worlds, and this means discussing what a faction is, their purpose in the world and story, and also how to track your party's favor within the faction, along with a few examples of different factions that I will write for you. So a faction is any group in your D&D world that holds two things, the first of which is a significant amount of members. The amount of members in the faction is important to show the party that this is an organization, a pre-established institution that comprises of rules and systems that one needs to follow to join. Without a significant number of people taking part of an organization, the party might simply ignore it or try to absorb it in some way, wasting your time and ruining the plans that you've made. The second thing your faction will need is a significant amount of power. The power that these factions hold can be political, magical, or lawful. Regardless, the power must be larger than one person and needs to be an institution of the world. The power that factions hold should shape the way the world works in some way, cementing them as a powerhouse throughout the campaign. This means magical wizarding schools, bounty hunting orders, and the King's Guard are all different types of factions that you could incorporate. Their power must be potent and ingrained into who they are and what they represent. It defines them and their ways of life, and a faction should always be generally straightforward with the way that they are presented to the adventuring parties. Make it clear that the Paladin Order gets its powers from God and stands by an oath that the god has given to them. In this way, the faction's purpose and standing is easily understood by the party. Speaking of purpose, factions do a number of things in your D&D world. The first of which is that they help establish your world as a real place, giving the world a type of pre-established pecking order prior to the party's existence. And this pecking order reminds your party that despite the story revolving around them, the world doesn't. Factions are great at keeping low-level parties in their place, reminding them that they have to earn their way to the top of the world, and that they can't bend people to their whim, with factions dealing out punishments to parties that step out of line. The next thing that they do is provide an avenue for adventurers. Factions may be the big dogs of the world, but the world is just a backdrop for the party's story. So factions should need the party in some facet, whether that be a job that's too dangerous for their own people, or assistance in a particularly difficult task that they need to go searching for outside help with. Factions can also be antagonists for the party, providing adventures in a way where the party is working actively against the faction and their goals. Either of these ways work perfectly for fulfilling a faction's purpose, and the way the party completes these adventures can either gain them influence in the faction or gain them infamy within the faction. If you are going to have factions in your worlds, tracking the party's favor with the faction is a necessity. If in the last adventure the party completed for a faction, they failed the mission and barely escaped with their lives, leaving a member of that faction behind to die, the faction would remember that and they would need to act appropriately. But the party could have done 4 more adventures since then, and you could have forgotten. So keeping a fame and infamy tracking system for each of the faction's opinions on the party is extremely important. This is going to be a scale that starts from -10 and goes all the way to +10. With -10 being the maximum infamy in the faction that the party could gain, and +10 being the maximum fame. 0 being, of course, a standing where the party is of no interest to the faction in either direction. 1 to 5 would be a general entry level in the faction where the players are trusted, but they're kept at a distance, where they would only do some jobs and still need to prove themselves. Levels 5 to 8 is where the party would be high in the faction, right below the leaders themselves, and they would be doing some of the most important missions that the faction needs done. At the very end of the scale, finally at 9 and 10, this would be where the party would work hand in hand with the leaders of the faction and maybe even have essentially control over the faction itself. But this level of influence should not come until nearing the end of the campaign, when your players are almost at the peak of their power and the climax is approaching quickly. Starting your campaign, your party is going to be essentially nobodies in the world. Unless they were part of a faction in their backstory, their standing with any faction should be 0. If your players do have a faction in their backstory, I wouldn't make their starting favor anything more than 2. For the negatives, treat it equally and oppositely, with the antagonists not seeing the party as a threat at levels 1 to 5, but beyond those levels, starting with 5 and 8, the antagonistic faction will begin seeing them as a thorn in their side, and they're going to start actively working against the party. Finally, when you reach levels 9 and 10, the antagonist factions will turn their attention to actively try to eliminate the party at all costs. And like fame in a faction, infamy should only come when the party is reaching the end of their campaign. Having an antagonistic faction actively care about your party for the entire campaign, constantly trying to subvert them, can feel a little silly, like a Saturday morning cartoon villain. Now that we understand what a faction is, their purpose, and how to track their opinion on the party, we can now begin to write our factions. Keeping everything we've been over in mind, we will write both a normal faction and an antagonistic faction for our hypothetical campaign. Starting with the normal faction, which is actually written into one of our players' backstories, we have Mr. Benedict's monster hunting clan. And just like before with our locations, we will have to give a quick sum up of the faction that we can refer back to form adventures around later. So, Mr. Benedict's faction is the Venatorum de Monstrum. It is a monster hunting clan that is one of the few organizations with reach throughout the entire desert valley. The hunters in the clan are killers trained from birth to protect both their clan from wild monsters in the world and also to hunt monsters for not only their valuable pelts that the clan can sell, but also their invaluable natural resources that the clan uses in a number of ways. The clan's only permanent outpost is hidden to most of the world and is located west of the major settlements of the valley, deep in a cave centered around a natural spring. Despite this distance and seclusion, the clan actually has connections and influence throughout most of the valley, and they are known wide for their services, and they are often called upon by different settlements for protection. Okay, now on to the antagonists, who are currently not very happy with the party right off the bat. These are going to be the Knights of Superbia. They are an elite force trained by King Superbia himself to be the deadliest killers in the valley. These knights are the sole protectors of Superbia's kingdom, but are also now located in every major settlement. They're on what in the public's eyes is supposed to be a diplomatic mission, but in reality, King Superbia sent out his knights to each settlement in order to steal power sources to fuel his own kingdom. Factions and antagonistic factions are vastly important in your world, and I would say ones like these should be used, but used importantly and sparingly. Have only 1 or 2 antagonistic factions written in already disliking the party, and any more than this, make it the party's decision to gain infamy with these factions. And for other factions that are just regular neutral ones, I would say add as many as you feel necessary for your world while you are writing. Thank you for watching another tips and tutorials. From now on, I think the upload schedule that will work best for me is going to be Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, so I would come back and expect a video posted weekly on those days. And to ensure that you don't miss out on those videos, be sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot. Also, if this is the first video you are watching from me, thank you, and I hope that you stick around, as well as check out some of my other D&D content in the tips and tutorials playlist. Farewell and have fun playing your games.